Hey everybody, Jim from Cigars. Today we're going to do a deep dive into My Father Cigars, which by cigar company standards is a pretty new company actually, but it's a really interesting story and I'm looking forward to telling it to you. It all started with Don Pepin Garcia, who was involved in cigar production in Cuba, but in 2002 he immigrated to Miami and he bought a little cigar production business with like less than 12 rollers in Little Havana, and he chose a really interesting name for this company, a pretty gutsy one. It translates from Spanish to English into the King of Cuban Cigars. So he certainly had a lot of confidence, that's for sure. The company started out being a contract manufacturer. In other words, they were making cigars for other labels, and their first big customer was Pete Johnson at Tatuaje. And they were making Tatuaje cigars starting already in 2003. And around that time, Don Pepin also launched his own line called the Don Pepin Cigars, which is still around in some way, shape, or form as part of the My Father line today. Don Pepin Garcia really felt strongly with his Cuban heritage. He felt strongly about bringing Cuban production methods to the cigar operation that he started in Miami. So My Father Cigars, in my opinion, are the most Cuban-esque cigars of the New World cigars. One of the things that Don Pepin did was using triple fermented tobacco. And that simply means that it's fermented 3 times, which gives it extra flavor and body. The other thing that he insisted on was a triple seam cap in his cigars. And a triple seam cap is primarily used only in Cuban cigars. Not all Cuban cigars even have it. But New World cigars tend to be 2-seam caps. And lastly, he adopted the rolling technique that he learned as a roller in Cuba, and that's called Entubada. And Entubada cigars are, instead of the filler leaves just being bunched together in often an accordion fashion or rolled fashion, each individual leaf is rolled into a tube, and then those tubes are bunched together in careful order. It's actually a very painstaking and pretty expensive way to make cigars. Fast forward a few years, and Don Pepin is now making cigars not only for Tatuaje, but also La Aroma de Cuba and San Cristobal for the Levin family, who also owns the Ashton brand. And they continue to make all those cigars today for those companies. But around at the same time, Don Pepin's son, Jamie Garcia, got more involved in the business and decided to create his own blend, which he named My Father to honor his father, Don Pepin. And that label was so successful that it turned into the My Father cigars that we know today. By 2007, they were making 5 million cigars a year, so they had far outgrown their Miami facility. So by 2009, they ended up moving to Nicaragua. And that move gave them an opportunity to do something that really helped their business grow. And that is they took control of the entire process. They bought fields in Nicaragua and warehouses for storing and fermenting and aging cigars. And the production, of course. And they even built a box factory in Esteli to make their own cigar boxes. So they really brought all the facets of cigar production under one umbrella, which they controlled. So My Father chugged along through the 2010s, had quite a few very highly rated cigars and 2 #1 cigars by that one magazine and 1 #2 cigar of the year. So pretty impressive performance in the 2010s. In 2019, they did something kind of interesting. They acquired Fonseca, the non-Cuban Fonseca brand, from a company I believe is called Casada. And they took the Fonseca brand and rejuvenated it. They changed all the blends. They moved production and tobacco growing to Nicaragua from the Dominican Republic and really took what were very run-of-the-mill cigars and made it into a pretty good brand. So that brings us today, and My Father Cigars is producing 20 million cigars a year. So they're a major force in the cigar business. Next, let's take a look at the various labels under the My Father Cigars umbrella. And I'm just going to hit some of the highlights on it. We'll go through all of them pretty quickly, but I'll hit some of the highlights and the ones that I think if you haven't tried them, maybe you should. Of course, the flagship line is My Father Cigars, which is still pretty popular, and it gets pretty good ratings, but it's not at the top of the line like the next cigar they introduced, which was the La Flor de Antilles, which was the #1 cigar of 2012 by that one magazine. And they followed that up in 2015 with Le Bijou 1922, which also was a #1 cigar of that year. And out of the top 4, the last but not least, is the La Opulencia, which got a #2 rating for Cigar of the Year, which is still nothing to sneeze at. And moving on down a little bit, the Don Pepin Garcia line under the My Father umbrella actually consists of, I think, 5 cigars, and with different colored labels. The most classic one is the blue label original, but there are other ones too, and they all do pretty well in terms of getting good ratings. I would also take a look at the Judge line and also the La Antigüedad line of cigars from My Father. They're pretty good. A little bit of a step below the ones we talked about earlier, but still very good. A real diamond in the rough, though, I think, is Fonseca. And we talked about that a little earlier, how it's a relatively new brand from My Father that they acquired and completely revised and reblended into a Nicaraguan cigar. And that's more of a medium body. I didn't mention yet, but a lot of the My Father cigars fit into the medium full, maybe inching up a little bit toward full. And they all kind of live in that territory. But the Fonsecas are a little bit below medium full, maybe medium to medium full. And it's a little bit different experience for smoking a My Father cigar, but still with all the advantages and great things about My Father cigars. And there's a few other bands as well. The Connecticut, for example, they really haven't caught on in terms of popularity. Not to diminish the ones that I haven't mentioned, but I would stick with the ones that I mentioned. If you're unfamiliar with My Father or haven't explored all those yet, I would kind of stay with the ones that we've mentioned so far. All right, I hope you enjoyed this deep dive into My Father cigars, and I really enjoy doing these looks at cigar companies and kind of looking deeply into them, maybe catching a few cigars that I haven't really tried before, and I hope you feel the same way. So I will see you next time from Cigars, Cigars, Cigars.